The chessboard doesn't care who you are. Black and white squares acknowledge only the strength of your mind, the depth of your strategy. Darnell Jackson knew this truth at 12 years old, solving grandmaster puzzles in the shadows of Preston Academy's library while his father mopped floors nearby. Grant Langford, tech millionaire, school benefactor, self-proclaimed chess enthusiast, saw only a janitor's son, a convenient punchline for his charity gala entertainment. "Let's see the maintenance man's boy play against a real opponent," he announced to appreciative laughter, cameras ready to capture the expected humiliation. But Darnell had been taught by his late mother that true strength hides itself until the perfect moment. As wealthy guests in evening wear gathered around the exhibition board, champagne flutes tinkling, none suspected they were about to witness not just a game, but a revolution. One quiet boy's opening move in a match against an entire system rigged against him. The tall iron gates of Preston Academy gleamed in the late afternoon sun, their polished black surfaces reflecting the wealth and prestige of the institution they guarded. Beyond the gates, limestone buildings with ivy-covered walls housed the children of America's elite, senators' daughters, hedge fund managers' sons, and tech billionaires' heirs. The immaculate grounds of this exclusive prep school were maintained with military precision, not a blade of grass out of place, not a flower petal permitted to fall without being swiftly removed. Among these manicured lawns and marble hallways moved a man known to most simply as Mr. Otis. He pushed his cleaning cart with a slight limp, the result of an old injury that ached worse on cold days. At 52, his close-cropped hair had begun to gray at the temples and deep lines framed his eyes that had seen much but judged little. Otis Jackson had worked as Preston Academy's janitor for nearly 15 years, becoming as much a fixture of the school as its century-old oak trees, though considerably less noticed. "Evening, Mr. Otis," called Mrs. Winters, the elderly math teacher, one of the few staff members who consistently acknowledged his presence. "Those boys in 3B left quite a mess today." "No trouble at all, ma'am," Otis replied with a nod and a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. Got nowhere else to be. This wasn't entirely true. Otis did have somewhere, or rather someone, to return to. His 12-year-old son, Darnell. The boy was waiting in the school library, as he did every day after his own public school let out, until Otis finished his shift at 7. In the furthest corner of Preston Academy's 3-story library, behind a towering shelf of leather-bound classics, Darnell Jackson sat cross-legged on the floor. The restricted section was technically off-limits to non-students, but the boy had found that if he entered quietly during the afternoon shift change and chose this particular corner, he could remain undetected for hours. Today, he had spread out his dog-eared notebook beside a massive tome titled Principles of Positional Play, Advanced Chess Theory. Darnell's fingers moved across the pages, tracing diagrams of chess positions as his mind calculated variations and counter-strategies. His notebook didn't contain homework from his public school across town. It was filled with meticulously drawn chessboards, annotated games, and invented tactics that would have impressed players 3 times his age. "Knight to G5, he whispered to himself, visualizing the move. "Then if pawn takes... No, that doesn't work. But what if..." The boy's concentration was so complete that he didn't notice the shadow fall across his notebook until a voice broke his reverie. "What are you doing back here, janitor's kid?" Darnell looked up to see Preston Langford staring down at him, his school blazer bearing the Preston Academy crest. An irony not lost on Darnell that the school's most notorious bully shared a name with the institution itself. The 14-year-old's perfectly styled blonde hair and tailored uniform couldn't hide the meanness in his eyes. "Just reading," Darnell said quietly, closing his notebook. Preston snatched it before Darnell could put it away. "Chess?" he sneered, flipping through the pages. "You actually think you're smart enough for this?" "Give it back, please," Darnell said, his voice steady despite the hammering in his chest. "Or what? You'll tell your dad to mop me up?" Preston laughed, tossing the notebook onto the floor. "Chess is for people with actual brains, not janitors. Kids who sneak in where they don't belong." As Preston walked away, laughing with 2 friends who had joined him, Darnell carefully picked up his notebook, smoothing its bent pages. He'd grown accustomed to Preston's taunts over the years. They were as predictable as they were unimaginative. "Don't mind him," came a gentle voice from behind the nearest bookshelf. Miss Claire, the young librarian with kind eyes and a perpetual stack of books in her arms, emerged from between the shelves. In her early 30s, with warm brown hair usually kept in a messy bun, Claire Bennett had noticed Darnell's regular visits months ago, but had chosen to keep his secret. "I wasn't hiding very well today, was I?" Darnell asked with a small smile. "Well, enough for most people," Claire replied, sitting down beside him. "But I'm trained to notice who's in my library." She glanced at the chess book. "Heavy reading for someone your age." Darnell shrugged. "It makes sense to me." Claire nodded thoughtfully, then stood up. "Wait here a minute." When she returned, she carried a slimmer volume bound in faded red leather. "I found this in our archives last week. Thought you might find it interesting." She placed it on the floor beside him. Just happened to pull it by accident. The title read, "Endgame Strategies of the Soviet Grandmasters, 1953–1972. "Thank you, Miss Claire," Darnell whispered, already opening to the first page with reverence. "Just remember to tuck it back in that gap on the bottom shelf before you leave," she said with a wink. "Accidents happen all the time in libraries." As the sun began to set, casting long shadows through the tall library windows, Darnell reluctantly closed his books. He carefully returned the red volume to its hiding place and gathered his things. His father would be finishing his shift soon. He found Otis in the main hallway, emptying trash cans. "Ready to head home, son?" Otis asked, his tired face brightening at the sight of his boy. "Yes, sir," Darnell replied, falling into step beside his father's cleaning cart. Their small apartment was a 20-minute bus ride from Preston Academy. It wasn't much, 2 bedrooms, a tiny kitchen, and a living room barely big enough for their second-hand couch. But Otis had made it a home. Photos of Darnell's mother, Loretta, adorned every wall. Though she had passed away from cancer when Darnell was only 7, her presence remained strong in their lives. After a simple dinner of spaghetti and meatballs, Otis pulled out a worn, cardboard chessboard and set it on their kitchen table. "You up for a game tonight?" he asked, though he already knew the answer. This was their ritual, their time together. "Always," Darnell said, helping to set up the plastic pieces, some chipped, others slightly melted from the time they'd been left too close to the stove. Otis played black, as he always did. His skill was modest. He'd learned the game as a young man in the army, but what he lacked in technique, he made up for in enthusiasm. Darnell, playing white, moved his pieces with careful consideration, occasionally holding back to extend their game. "Check," Otis said proudly after a particularly bold move with his queen. Darnell studied the board, seeing 12 possible continuations, calculating which would be most fun for his father. He chose one that would let the game continue another 10 minutes. "Good move, Dad," he said sincerely, because it had been intuitive and brave, even if ultimately unsound. As they played, Darnell's mind drifted to memories of his mother. Loretta Jackson had been a high school math teacher with a gift for making numbers dance. Before her illness took hold, she'd taught Darnell logic puzzles and pattern recognition games, marveling at how quickly he absorbed complex concepts. "Your mind is special, baby," she'd told him once while they solved a puzzle meant for students twice his age. "Don't you ever let anyone dim your light." "Checkmate," Darnell said gently, bringing his focus back to the present game. Otis studied the board, then laughed. "Walked right into that one, didn't I?" He reached across the table to ruffle his son's short curls. "Your mama would be so proud of that brain of yours." The next day at lunch, Darnell sat alone on a bench outside Preston Academy, waiting for his father's break. He'd brought his chess notebook and was sketching a particularly challenging position when a shadow fell across the page. "Hey, chess, boy," Preston's voice rang out, loud enough to draw attention from nearby students lounging on the academy's grounds. "Still pretending you're a genius?" Darnell closed his notebook, but Preston snatched it away, holding it up for his friends to see. "Look at this, guys. The janitor's kid thinks he's Bobby Fischer." A small crowd gathered, some students laughing, others watching uncomfortably but saying nothing. "He's got little diagrams and everything," Preston continued, flipping through the pages mockingly. "Bet he doesn't even know how the horsey moves." It's called a night, Darnell said quietly, standing up, and I'd like my notebook back, please. Oh, it speaks. Preston feigned surprise. Tell you what, if you can beat me at chess, I'll give it back. Otherwise, maybe it belongs in the trash, like, what seems to be the problem here? A deep voice interrupted. The crowd parted as Grant Langford strode across the lawn. Tall and imposing in his tailored suit, Preston's father carried himself with the absolute confidence of a man worth 9 figures. His technology company, Langford Innovations, had made him one of the richest men in the state, and his sizable donations to Preston Academy ensured his influence permeated every corner of the school. Nothing, Dad, Preston said, quickly lowering the notebook. Just talking to the janitor's kid. Grant Langford's eyes narrowed slightly as he assessed Darnell. You're Otis's boy, aren't you? Darnell nodded. Yes, sir. Darnell Jackson. He thinks he's some chess prodigy, Preston added with a smirk. Has a whole notebook of moves. Something calculating flickered in Grant's eyes. Chess, is it? I was quite the player in college, competed in the Ivy League championship. He turned to the gathered students. Did you know next week's charity gala was still missing entertainment? A slow, amused smile spread across his face as he looked back at Darnell. Perhaps we could arrange a little exhibition match. What do you say, young man? Care to test your skills against a real player at our fundraiser? Could be educational for everyone. The students snickered. Darnell understood perfectly what was happening. He was being set up as a joke, entertainment for the wealthy donors. His cheeks burned with humiliation. I don't think, he began. Excellent, Grant interrupted, clapping his hands together. Next Friday evening, then. Black tie affair, but don't worry about that. We'll find something appropriate for you to wear. As Grant walked away, Preston tossed the notebook at Darnell's feet. Hope you enjoy being laughed at, chess boy, he said. My dad's going to crush you in front of everyone who matters. Darnell stood frozen, the notebook at his feet, as the bell rang and Preston and his friends returned to their classes. Only when the courtyard had emptied did he bend down to retrieve his precious pages, his hands trembling slightly. How would he tell his father? Absolutely not, Otis said that evening, his voice firm but quiet. They're just setting you up for humiliation, son. I won't allow it. They sat at their kitchen table, the chessboard between them untouched. Darnell had explained the situation as soon as his father had picked him up from the library. I know what they're doing, Dad, Darnell replied, his young face solemn. But I want to play him. Why? So a bunch of rich folks can laugh at you? At us? Otis rarely showed anger, but there was fire in his eyes now. That man thinks we're entertainment, Darnell, like we're some sideshow. Darnell looked down at his hands, then back up at his father with determination. Mom always said never to dim my light. His voice was soft but steady. If I back down now, I'll always wonder. Otis studied his son's face, seeing not just Loretta's eyes looking back at him, but her spirit too, that same quiet, unshakable resolve. He sighed deeply. You're sure about this? Darnell nodded. I'm sure, Dad. Then I'll be right there with you, Otis said, reaching across the table to squeeze his son's shoulder. Every move. By Monday morning, word of the upcoming chess match had spread throughout Preston Academy like wildfire. As Darnell walked through the halls beside his father before school, whispers and stares followed them. That's him, the one who's playing Mr. Langford. 5 minutes tops before he's crying. Can janitors even play chess? In the cafeteria, Preston held court at his usual table, surrounded by admirers. I'll bet my Rolex he loses in under 5 minutes, he announced loudly as Darnell passed by. Any takers? Several students laughed, but no one took the bet. The outcome seemed too certain to even make gambling interesting. After school, Darnell retreated to his corner in the library. Pulling out the red endgame book Miss Claire had shown him, he was so absorbed in a particularly complex position that he didn't notice her approach until she placed another book beside him. Thought you might like this one too, she said, sitting down across from him. The book was titled The Prodigy's Path, the biography of Samuel Matthews. Who's Samuel Matthews? Darnell asked, examining the cover. Only one of the most innovative American grandmasters of the 1980s, Claire replied. He revolutionized the Sicilian defense before disappearing from the competitive scene. She hesitated, then added more quietly, I dated his second cousin in graduate school. He told me some fascinating stories. Darnell's eyes widened. You know about chess? Claire smiled. Enough to recognize real talent when I see it. Her expression grew more serious. I heard about the challenge with Mr. Langford. The whole staff is talking about it. Do they think it's funny too? Darnell asked, his voice smaller than he intended. Some do, Claire admitted. Others. She glanced around to make sure they were alone. Others are rooting for you. More than you might think. That night, and every night that week, Darnell stayed up late studying. He pushed his bed against the wall and used chalk to draw a giant chessboard on his bedroom floor. Hour after hour, he replayed famous games in his head, moving imaginary pieces across the chalked squares, analyzing positions, and memorizing patterns. Sometimes he'd close his eyes and play entire games against himself, holding complex positions in his mind without ever touching a piece. In these mental battles, he imagined facing Grant Langford, visualizing his likely strategies based on what he'd learned about the man's personality and playing style. On Wednesday, while helping his father clean the school gym after hours, Darnell noticed an elderly man meticulously mopping the basketball court. His weathered hands moved with surprising grace, and there was something methodical about his movements that caught Darnell's attention. That's Mr. Rubin, Otis explained when he noticed his son watching. Been here longer than me. Keeps to himself, mostly. Later, as Darnell filled his bucket at the utility sink, he found himself standing next to the older janitor. You're the chess player, Mr. Rubin said without looking up, his accent thick but clear. Darnell was startled. Yes, sir. Mr. Rubin nodded slowly, still focused on rinsing his mop. I saw you in library, with Endgame book. He finally turned, to look at Darnell, his pale blue eyes sharp and assessing. You hold board in your head, yes? You see moves before making them? How did you know that? Darnell asked, surprised. A hint of a smile crossed the old man's face. Because I was same, long time ago in Leningrad. He extended his hand. Isaac Rubin. Once upon time I was rising star of Soviet chess school, before I leave for America. Darnell shook his hand, astonished. You were a chess player? In Russia? Not just player, master candidate, until politics become complicated. Rubin's expression darkened momentarily, then cleared. Now I clean floors. But chess, he tapped his temple. Chess stays here always. Over the next 2 days, Mr. Rubin became Darnell's secret mentor. They met during lunch breaks in the boiler room, where Rubin had set up a small table and chess set. Langford will expect child who plays obvious moves, Rubin explained, his fingers dancing over the pieces. You must play invisible chess. Invisible chess? Darnell repeated, confused. Chess that hides your strength until too late, Rubin said with a sly smile, like tiger in tall grass. Enemy thinks you are mouse until you pounce. He rearranged the pieces. First 10 moves you play solid but unremarkable, make him think you are ordinary. Then, he suddenly sacrificed his bishop, leading to a stunning combination. You show true self. Meanwhile, across town in his penthouse office, Grant Langford was taking the upcoming match more seriously than he'd initially let on. Though, he still viewed it as entertainment for his guests. His competitive nature wouldn't allow him to risk even the slightest chance of embarrassment. I've arranged for Dmitri to come by tomorrow, he told his son over dinner at an exclusive restaurant. Just to brush up on my openings. Dmitri? Preston asked, barely looking up from his phone. Dmitri Petrov, international master. Gives lessons at the downtown chess club. Grant straightened his tie, a nervous habit he'd never fully shaken. Not that I need much preparation for a child, but appearances matter. Why bother? Preston snorted. The janitor's kid probably learned chess from a cereal box. Grant's eyes narrowed slightly. Never underestimate an opponent, Preston. That's the first rule of business. And chess. He sipped his water. Besides, the donors are expecting a show. If I checkmate him too quickly, it hardly justifies the open bar. Back at Preston Academy, Darnell was learning rapidly under Mr. Rubin's tutelage. The old Russian had shown him techniques and ideas that weren't in any of the books he'd studied, subtleties of position and psychology that could only be passed from master to student. Your strength is calculation, Rubin told him. But Langford will not expect imagination. This will be your weapon. On Thursday afternoon, as Darnell practiced endgames with Rubin in their hidden corner of the maintenance area, they were interrupted by the sound of someone entering the room. Rubin quickly moved to block the chessboard from view, but it was too late. Preston Langford stood in the doorway, his phone in hand. "Well, well," Preston said with a smirk. "Secret lessons from the Russian janitor? That's pathetic." Before Darnell could respond, Preston darted forward and grabbed Rubin's notebook of chess positions and analysis which lay open on a nearby shelf. "Give that back," Darnell said, standing up. "It doesn't belong to you." "Just like you don't belong at my father's gala," Preston retorted, backing toward the door. "But that's not stopping you, is it?" As Preston turned to leave with the stolen notes, he collided with Mr. Rubin, who had moved with surprising speed for his age. The old man's hand clamped firmly around Preston's wrist. "In my country," Rubin said, his voice quiet but steel-edged. "Taking what is not yours had serious consequences." He slowly removed the notebook from Preston's grasp. "Here, perhaps only damaged reputation when others learn son of wealthy man steals from school janitors." Preston's face flushed. "Nobody would believe you, perhaps, perhaps not." Rubin's smile didn't reach his eyes. "But your father, man who built empire on reputation, might wonder why son must cheat to help him beat 12-year-old boy." Preston wrenched his arm free and stormed out without another word. "He will tell his father about me now," Rubin sighed, returning to the chessboard. "But no matter. You have learned enough." That evening, Grant Langford appeared on a local business podcast, discussing the upcoming charity gala. When the host mentioned the chess exhibition, Grant laughed. "It'll be a quick match, I expect," he said confidently. "I mean, I respect anyone who plays the game, but this is a child with no formal training. Unless he can levitate pawns or read my mind, I think the outcome is pretty clear." The podcast clip circulated online, eventually reaching Darnell through a link Miss Claire sent to Otis's email. Father and son watched it together on their small kitchen table. "He thinks you're just a novelty act," Otis said, his jaw tight with suppressed anger. Darnell stared at the frozen image of Grant Langford's smiling face on the screen. "Good," he said simply. That night, Darnell lay in bed staring at his ceiling, unable to sleep. In his mind, chess pieces moved across invisible boards, not one game, but 6 simultaneous matches, each exploring different openings and strategies he might face tomorrow. As the clock passed midnight, a small smile formed on his lips. Let Grant Langford bring his arrogance and his expensive suits. Let Preston bring his mockery and his friends. Let the wealthy donors bring their expectations of entertainment. Darnell would bring something they couldn't see coming. He closed his eyes, knight capturing rook, bishop sliding diagonally across his mental board, and finally drifted to sleep, with a quiet certainty. Tomorrow would change everything. The Bellamy Hotel's grand ballroom sparkled under the light of 3 massive crystal chandeliers. White-gloved waiters glided between guests, carrying silver trays of champagne flutes and delicate hors d'oeuvres. The air hummed with the soft notes of a string quartet and the murmur of conversations among the city's elite. Bank executives, in tailored tuxedos, politicians' wives dripping with diamonds, and tech entrepreneurs whose casual attire somehow still screamed money. At the center of the ballroom, a circular stage had been erected, upon which sat a single mahogany table with an inlaid chessboard. 2 chairs faced each other across the board, one a high-backed leather throne, the other a standard hotel chair that seemed diminutive by comparison. In a small preparation room off the main hall, Darnell Jackson adjusted the sleeves of a suit jacket that hung slightly loose on his frame. The clothes had belonged to Mr. Rubin in his younger days, a simple black suit carefully pressed with a white shirt and dark blue tie. "You look handsome, son," Otis said, his voice thick with emotion. He stood behind Darnell, hands resting gently on his shoulders as they both faced the mirror. "Your mother would be so proud." Darnell nodded, unable to speak past the knot in his throat. His father wore his only suit, the one he reserved for church on Easter and Christmas, and had polished his old dress shoes until they gleamed. A soft knock at the door announced Miss Claire's arrival. She wore a simple emerald dress, her hair swept up in an elegant twist. "They're ready for you," she said, her eyes meeting Darnell's in the mirror. "Remember what we talked about. No matter what happens out there, you belong at that board." Darnell took a deep breath, straightened his tie one last time, and turned to face his small circle of supporters. "Let's go." As Darnell emerged into the ballroom with his father and Miss Claire, a hush fell over the crowd. From across the room, Grant Langford, resplendent in a custom tuxedo with satin lapels, raised his champagne glass in mock salute. Beside him, Preston smirked, his phone already out to record what he assumed would be Darnell's humiliation. The master of ceremonies tapped a microphone at the edge of the stage. "Ladies and gentlemen, we now present the special entertainment for this evening's fundraiser, a unique chess exhibition between our very own tech pioneer and generous donor, Mr. Grant Langford, and a local young enthusiast." Polite applause rippled through the audience as Grant strode confidently to the stage, buttoning his jacket with practiced ease. He took the microphone with the casual authority of a man accustomed to commanding attention. "Thank you all for coming tonight," he began, flashing his camera-ready smile. "As you know, education has always been my passion, which is why I'm thrilled to host this little demonstration." He gestured toward Darnell, who stood quietly at the edge of the stage. "Tonight, we crown the king of the janitorial chess league." Laughter bubbled through the crowd. A few people glanced uncomfortably at each other, but most seemed perfectly at ease with the thinly veiled mockery. Preston, positioned near the front with a group of classmates, snickered loudly. Darnell's face remained impassive as he climbed the steps to the stage. He could feel every eye in the room on him, hear the whispers and chuckles. His hands trembled slightly, but he remembered Mr. Rubin's words. Control center first, board center, and mind center. He took his seat in the smaller chair facing Grant across the polished chessboard. "White or black, young man?" Grant asked, his voice carrying to the audience. "Though as the challenged party, I suppose I should offer you white." "Black is fine, sir," Darnell replied quietly. Grant raised an eyebrow, amused. "Brave choice. Very well." The hotel's events manager, serving as referee, started the clock. Grant immediately pushed his king's pawn forward 2 squares, the most standard of openings. Darnell responded with a slightly unusual defensive setup, one that Mr. Rubin had shown him, solid, but appearing somewhat passive. Grant continued developing his pieces with textbook precision, occasionally glancing at the audience with a confident smile. By the 10th move, Grant had established an aggressive position, his pieces aimed at Darnell's kingside. To the untrained observers, it looked as though the Millionaire was dominating the board. Preston had zoomed in with his phone camera, ready to capture the moment of Darnell's defeat. "Check," Grant announced after pushing his bishop diagonally across the board. A murmur went through the crowd. Several people nodded knowingly to each other, as if the expected outcome was now merely minutes away. Darnell studied the board, his face betraying nothing. Then, to everyone's surprise, he smiled, just a slight upward curl of his lips. At the back of the ballroom, Miss Claire stood watching intently, her knuckles white as she gripped her small clutch purse. Beside her, Mr. Rubin had slipped in unnoticed, his aged eyes fixed on the board with laser focus. "He waits," Rubin whispered. "Tiger in grass." Darnell moved his king to safety, then launched a counterattack so subtle that even Grant didn't immediately recognize the danger. 3 moves later, Darnell sacrificed his queen, an audacious move that drew gasps from the few knowledgeable chess players in the audience. Grant's eyes widened as he took the offered queen. He leaned forward, studying the board more carefully. Now, the showman's smile fading from his face. "What is happening?" Preston hissed to a classmate. "My dad just took his queen." 2 moves later, the trap was sprung. Using a brilliant knight fork, Darnell threatened both Grant's king and rook simultaneously. Grant's face flushed as he realized he had been lured into a carefully constructed web. "Incredible," whispered an older gentleman in the audience. The university's chess club director who had been invited as a donor. "That's a grandmaster-level combination." Sweat beaded on Grant's forehead as he desperately sought an escape. The minutes ticked by on the clock as he analyzed and reanalyzed the position, trying to find a way out. The audience, sensing the shift in momentum, fell completely silent. 12 moves ahead. That's how far Darnell had calculated when he sacrificed his queen. He sat calmly, hands folded in his lap, as Grant struggled with the position. In his mind, he could see all the variations, all the possible escapes, and all the ways to counter them. Finally, Grant made his move, the only one that postponed the inevitable. Darnell responded instantly, as if he'd been waiting for precisely that choice. 3 moves later, he announced quietly, "Checkmate." For several heartbeats, the ballroom was utterly silent. Grant Langford stared at the board in disbelief, his face red with a mixture of shock and humiliation. His king lay toppled, on its side a white flag of surrender. Then from the back of the room someone began to clap. It was Miss Claire, tears streaming down her face as she applauded. Mr. Rubin joined her, his weathered hands creating sharp staccato sounds. Slowly, uncertainly, others began to applaud as well. The university chess director stood up, clapping vigorously and nodding in appreciation of what he had just witnessed. More guests rose to their feet, the applause swelling into a genuine ovation. Grant Langford sat frozen, unable to process what had just happened. His eyes darted from the board to Darnell's calm face, searching for some explanation, some trick that would make sense of his defeat. Preston had lowered his phone, his expression a mixture of confusion and anger. The video he'd planned to share, of Darnell's humiliation, would never be posted. Otis made his way through the crowd to the stage, climbing the steps with tears in his eyes. As Darnell stood up, his father embraced him tightly. "That's my boy," he whispered, his voice breaking with pride. "That's my boy." From the edge of the stage, Grant Langford finally recovered enough composure to approach the microphone again. His typical smooth confidence had vanished, replaced by a brittle smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Well," he said, forcing a chuckle, "it seems we've discovered quite a talent here tonight. Congratulations, young man. A most surprising outcome." With that, he quickly exited the stage, ignoring the reporters who had begun to gather near the front, sensing an unexpected story developing before their eyes. As Darnell descended the steps with his father, Miss Claire hurried to meet them, Mr. Rubin following behind at his slower pace. "That was magnificent," Claire said, squeezing Darnell's hand. "Absolutely magnificent." Mr. Rubin simply nodded, a rare smile creasing his weathered face. "Invisible chess," he said softly. "Perfect execution." Before they could make their way to the exit, they found themselves surrounded by guests. Some genuinely impressed, others merely curious about the young prodigy who had just humiliated one of the city's most powerful men. "Young man," said the university chess director, handing Darnell his card, "I would very much like to speak with you about our youth development program." A woman with a press badge managed to push through. "That was incredible. Would you mind answering a few questions for our viewers?" As cameras flashed and questions flew, Darnell looked up at his father, overwhelmed by the sudden attention. Otis put a protective arm around his son's shoulders. "Just a few questions," he said firmly. "It's been a long night for both of us." No one noticed Grant Langford watching from across the room, his eyes cold with calculation as he whispered into his phone. "Find out everything about the boy and his father. Everything." The video of Darnell's checkmate, captured from multiple angles by attendees at the gala, exploded online overnight. By morning, clips of the 12-year-old janitor's son defeating the tech millionaire had been viewed over 10 million times. Child prodigy humiliates tech titan in chess upset, read the headline on the city's news website. Social media buzzed with the story, each share adding to the growing legend of Darnell Jackson, the chess genius from the wrong side of the tracks. "Did you see this?" Otis asked, holding up his old phone to show Darnell the view counter still climbing on the main video. They sat at their kitchen table, both still processing the events of the previous night. Darnell nodded, looking slightly uncomfortable with the attention. "Mr. Rubin says fame is double-edged sword. People build you up just to enjoy watching you fall." Otis studied his son with concern. At 12, Darnell still had the gangly limbs and round face of a child, but his eyes held a wisdom beyond his years, a wisdom that sometimes worried Otis. "We've got 3 interview requests already," Otis said, scrolling through his emails. "Morning shows want you on Monday." "What do you think I should do?" Darnell asked. Otis set down his phone with a sigh. "That's up to you, son. This is your gift, your moment. I'm just here to make sure nobody takes advantage of you." Before Darnell could respond, Otis's phone rang, an unknown number. "Mr. Jackson?" came a woman's voice when Otis answered. "This is Dr. Eleanor Winters from Westridge Academy. Our Board of Trustees has been watching your son's remarkable achievement with great interest. We'd like to offer Darnell a full scholarship to attend our school, effective immediately." Otis's hand tightened around the phone. Westridge Academy was one of the city's most prestigious private schools, the kind of place that produced future senators and CEOs. "That's very generous," he managed to say, "but I'd need to discuss this with my son." "Of course," Dr. Winters replied smoothly. "We're also prepared to offer you a position on our maintenance staff with a substantial increase in salary from your current employment. We believe in keeping families together." After hanging up, Otis relayed the conversation to Darnell, trying to keep his voice neutral despite the mixture of hope and suspicion swirling within him. "What do you think?" he asked. Darnell considered for a moment. "Would you be happy there, Dad?" The question caught Otis off guard. Leave it to his son to worry about him first. "I'd be happy wherever you can get the best education, Darnell. That's what your mother would have wanted." By Monday morning, the Jacksons had accepted 3 morning show interviews, but had put the Westridge offer on hold, deciding to wait and see what other opportunities might arise. The green room of Good Morning America buzzed with activity as makeup artists and producers fluttered around Darnell and Otis. They had been fitted with new suits, courtesy of the network, and were waiting to go on air. "Just be yourself," the segment producer advised, adjusting Darnell's tie. "America already loves your story." As the cameras rolled and the hosts introduced the chess prodigy who took the internet by storm, Darnell answered questions with the same quiet thoughtfulness he brought to the chessboard. "I just see the patterns," he explained when asked about his gift. "The pieces talk to each other across the board, and I listen to what they're saying." Social media exploded with new hashtags: Jock Chess Kid, Darnell's Game Plan, and Checkmate the System. Overnight, Darnell Jackson had become a symbol of hidden genius, of potential waiting to be discovered in unexpected places. By Tuesday, the offers were pouring in: scholarships to elite boarding schools, invitations to international chess tournaments, book deals, and even a movie rights inquiry. "It's overwhelming," Otis admitted to Miss Claire, who had stopped by their apartment with a basket of muffins and practical advice about dealing with sudden fame. "Just remember that everyone wants something," she cautioned, helping Darnell sort through the mountain of mail. Make sure what they want aligns with what's best for Darnell. Meanwhile, at Preston Academy, the atmosphere had shifted dramatically. The students who had once ignored or mocked Darnell now boasted about knowing him. "Oh yeah, I talked to him all the time when his dad was working late," claimed one senior to a group of impressed freshmen. Mr. Rubin continued his quiet work, saying nothing about his role in Darnell's success, though rumors had begun to circulate. about the Russian chess master hiding among the janitorial staff. Preston Langford, however, had not joined in the adulation. His humiliation at the gala, by extension of his father's defeat, had hardened into resentment. As students gathered in the cafeteria to watch yet another interview with Darnell, Preston scoffed loudly. He got lucky once, he told his dwindling circle of friends. My dad wasn't even trying his best. It was a charity event, for God's sake. When no one seemed convinced, Preston grew more desperate. You'll see. He'll crash and burn once he faces real competition. These people always do. These people? Repeated a girl who had once hung on Preston's every word. What's that supposed to mean? Preston's face flushed. You know what I mean. People who don't belong in our world. They get 15 minutes of fame and think they're special. The table fell silent, several students shifting uncomfortably. Without another word, two girls picked up their trays and moved to another table. By the end of lunch, Preston sat alone, stabbing at his salad with increasing fury. On Wednesday afternoon, Miss Claire was summoned to the headmaster's office. The usual warmth in Dr. Phillips's eyes had been replaced by a guarded formality that immediately put her on alert. Miss Bennett, he began, it has come to my attention that you may have overstepped certain boundaries regarding access to our restricted library collections. Claire straightened in her chair. I'm not sure what you mean, sir. We have reason to believe you provided Darnell Jackson with materials from our rare books collection without proper authorization. Books that are meant exclusively for the use of our students and faculty. I see, Claire replied, keeping her voice steady. And who exactly has made this accusation? Dr. Phillips cleared his throat uncomfortably. That's not relevant. What matters is that we have strict policies about— It was Grant Langford, wasn't it? Claire interrupted, anger overriding her usual restraint. He's embarrassed about losing to a child, so now he's looking for someone to blame. Miss Bennett! Dr. Phillips looked genuinely shocked at her outburst. Mr. Langford is one of our most generous donors. His concerns carry significant weight with the board. So do ethics and educational values, I would hope, Claire replied. Or does Preston Academy only believe in nurturing potential when it comes with the right last name and bank account? The meeting ended with Claire being placed on administrative leave pending a full investigation. As she packed up her personal items from the library office, several faculty members stopped by to offer quiet support, though none dared to do so publicly. This isn't right, whispered Mrs. Winters, the math teacher. Everyone knows you were just helping that boy learn. Claire smiled sadly. Sometimes doing the right thing comes with consequences. I'd do it again in a heartbeat. That evening, as Darnell and Otis prepared dinner in their small kitchen, Otis's phone rang. It was Miss Claire, her voice tight with controlled emotion as she explained what had happened. They can't do that, Darnell exclaimed when Otis relayed the news. Miss Claire didn't do anything wrong. They can, and they did, Otis replied grimly. That's how power works in this world, son. When people like us win, they change the rules. Later that night, as Darnell lay in bed staring at the ceiling, his phone pinged with a news alert. He opened it to find an article from the local business journal. Tech pioneer Grant Langford launches Chess for All, initiative to discover untapped talent in underprivileged communities. The article included quotes from Langford about how his match with Darnell had opened his eyes to the potential hiding in plain sight, and how he was honored to have played a small role in bringing this young man's abilities to light. Darnell read the article twice, a bitter taste filling his mouth. Langford was trying to rewrite history, to position himself as the benevolent discoverer rather than the humiliated opponent. The next morning brought even more troubling news. Mr. Rubin hadn't shown up for work, and when Otis called his apartment, there was no answer. It's probably nothing, Otis assured Darnell as they ate breakfast. Maybe he's just taking a day off to avoid all the reporters hanging around the school. But by lunchtime, word had spread that two men in dark suits had been asking questions about Rubin at Preston Academy, specifically about his immigration status and background. While cleaning the hallway outside the headmaster's office that afternoon, Otis overheard a heated phone conversation through the partially open door. "I understand your concerns, Mr. Langford," Dr. Phillips was saying, "but I'm not sure the board has grounds to investigate Mr. Jackson's employment status. His work record is exemplary." A pause as the person on the other end spoke. "Yes, of course. The school's reputation is paramount, but..." Another pause. "I see. If you feel that strongly, I'll bring it up at the next meeting. Though I must express my personal reservations about..." The headmaster's voice dropped too low for Otis to hear the rest, but he had heard enough. He quietly moved his cart down the hallway, his heart pounding. That evening, while sorting through the day's mail, now mostly fan letters for Darnell, Otis found an official-looking envelope addressed to him. Inside was a notice of an academic integrity audit being launched to investigate allegations that Darnell had received improper assistance in preparing for the chess match, potentially violating the spirit of fair competition. "This is ridiculous," Otis muttered, crumpling the letter in his fist. "They're actually trying to discredit a 12-year-old boy." Darnell took the crumpled paper and smoothed it out, reading it carefully. "They're scared, Dad," he said with wisdom beyond his years. "They thought they knew what I was capable of and they were wrong. Now they're afraid of what else they might be wrong about." On Friday morning, Miss Claire arrived at the Jacksons' apartment, her eyes red-rimmed but her spine straight. "I've been officially terminated," she announced without preamble. "Apparently I've violated the trust placed in me as guardian of the Academy's resources." "Claire, I'm so sorry," Otis began, but she waved away his sympathy. "Don't be. I knew the risks." She turned to Darnell, who stood frozen in the doorway. "I brought you something." From her bag, she produced a small wooden chess set, the pieces worn smooth from years of use. "It was my grandfather's. He taught me to play when I was about your age." Her voice caught. "I want you to have it." Darnell accepted the gift with trembling hands. "I never meant for any of this to happen," he whispered. Claire knelt down to meet his eyes. "Listen to me, Darnell. None of this is your fault. You did nothing wrong. You showed your light to the world just like your mother wanted. Some people will try to dim it because it makes them uncomfortable. Don't let them." As Claire hugged Darnell goodbye, none of them noticed the black SUV parked across the street, or the two men in suits watching their building with expressionless faces. By late afternoon, the news broke on local stations. Homeland Security agents had arrested Isaac Rubin on charges related to immigration fraud dating back to his arrival from the Soviet Union decades earlier. "This can't be a coincidence," Otis said, pacing their small living room as the report played on their TV. "First Claire, now Rubin. Langford is systematically removing everyone who helped you." Darnell sat at the kitchen table, Claire's chess set open before him, moving pieces in a distracted pattern. "What happens now, Dad?" Otis stopped pacing and looked at his son, still so young, yet carrying burdens no child should have to bear. "Now we decide what's worth fighting for," he said, sitting down across from Darnell. "The U.S. junior chess team called again today. They want you to represent the country at the international tournament in Berlin next month." "Berlin?" Darnell's eyes widened. "But how? We can't afford..." "That's just it," Otis interrupted, his expression grim. "They said Langford Innovations has offered to sponsor you as part of their new initiative. Full expenses paid, media coverage, the works. But there are conditions." "What kind of conditions?" "You'd need to sign an agreement. No discussing the gala match. A statement praising Langford's mentorship. Basically rewriting history to make him look good." Darnell was quiet for a long moment, his fingers tracing the edge of the chess king. "What do you think I should do?" Otis reached across the table and took his son's hands. "I think your mother would say that some opportunities cost too much. I'd rather see you miss Berlin than kneel for it." Darnell nodded slowly, then more firmly. "Then that's what we'll do. We'll find another way." As father and son sat together at their kitchen table, a new resolve forming between them. Neither could have imagined the forces already being set in motion, or that their greatest challenges still lay ahead. The morning after refusing Langford's sponsorship offer, Darnell sat at the kitchen table, methodically solving chess problems from an old book Mr. Rubin had given him. Though his expression remained calm, his mind raced with worries about his former mentor's fate. The sharp knock at the door startled both Jacksons. Otis peered through the peephole, then opened the door to reveal a tall woman in a crisp navy suit. "Mr. Jackson? I'm Amanda Fletcher, Executive Director of the U.S. Chess Federation." She extended a business card. "May I come in? I'd like to speak with Darnell." Once seated in their modest living room, Fletcher got straight to the point. "Darnell, your performance against Grant Langford was exceptional. The selection committee has unanimously voted to offer you a position on the U.S. junior chess team for the Berlin International Youth Championship next month." Darnell exchanged a quick glance with his father. "That's very kind, but I understand Langford Industries offered sponsorship," Fletcher interrupted, her expression hardening slightly. "And I've heard you declined their terms." "Yes, ma'am," Otis confirmed. "The conditions were problematic." Fletcher nodded. "I thought as much. That's partly why I'm here. The Federation wants Darnell on that team, with or without corporate sponsorship." She leaned forward. "But I won't sugarcoat this. We need private funding to make it happen. The Federation's budget is stretched thin this year. So we're back where we started," Otis sighed. "Not quite." Fletcher opened her briefcase and removed a folder. "There are other potential sponsors. However, the selection board, which unfortunately includes Grant Langford, must approve any official sponsorship." Darnell's brow furrowed. "Mr. Langford is on the chess selection board?" "His company became a major donor last year," Fletcher explained. "It gives him considerable influence, though not absolute control." As they discussed options, Otis's phone rang. The school superintendent's name flashed on the screen. "Mr. Jackson," came the strained voice when Otis answered. "I'm calling about an irregularity that's been brought to my attention. The board has authorized an academic integrity audit concerning your son's chess activities." Otis's grip tightened on the phone. "What kind of irregularity?" "There have been concerns raised about whether Darnell received inappropriate coaching from Preston Academy staff. The board feels this may constitute an unfair advantage." After ending the call, Otis relayed the conversation to Fletcher, whose professional demeanor cracked slightly. "This is absurd," she muttered. "They're investigating a child for being too good at chess?" "It's not about chess," Darnell said quietly. "It's about showing people their place." The next day, Miss Clare received a formal request to testify about her interactions with Darnell. The letter, printed on Preston Academy letterhead, carefully avoided direct accusations while implying that she had provided extraordinary assistance beyond ethical boundaries. "They want me to say I coached you," Claire told Darnell when she visited that evening. "They're building a narrative that you only won because you had insider help from Academy resources. But that's not true," Darnell protested. "You just gave me books." Claire smiled sadly. "Truth isn't always the point in these situations, Darnell." The following morning, Claire submitted her formal response, refusing to testify that she had provided any improper assistance. By afternoon, she had received notice that her severance package would be withheld pending investigation outcomes. Meanwhile, Otis continued his janitorial duties at Preston Academy, though the atmosphere had grown increasingly hostile. Fellow staff members either avoided him entirely or offered awkward sympathy in hushed tones. Twice, he found his supply closet rearranged and equipment missing. While cleaning outside the teacher's lounge, Otis overheard two board members discussing Mr. Rubin. Homeland Security doesn't just arrest someone over paperwork filed 40 years ago, one was saying. Someone had to flag his case specifically. Well, having a former Soviet citizen coaching a child prodigy does raise questions, the other replied, especially given the current political climate. Otis moved away before they noticed him, his hands trembling with anger. It was becoming clear that Rubin's arrest was no coincidence. Someone had deliberately dug into his past to find leverage. That evening, as Darnell practiced endgames in his room, Otis received another call, this time from a court-appointed attorney representing Isaac Rubin. "Mr. Rubin asked me to deliver a message," the lawyer said. He told me to tell Darnell. You must learn endgames without me now. After relaying the message, Otis found his son staring out the window, Claire's chess pieces arranged in a complex endgame position. It's not fair, Darnell whispered. Mr. Rubin didn't do anything wrong, neither did Miss Claire. Life isn't always fair, son, Otis replied, sitting beside him. But we keep playing anyway. Later that night, after Otis had gone to bed, Darnell received an unusual email on the account they'd set up to manage his chess correspondence. The message contained no text, only a link to a secure chat platform and a simple username, Isaiah, 1968. Curious, Darnell clicked the link and entered the chat. Hello, Darnell Jackson. Darnell hesitated before typing. Who is this? My name is Isaiah Williams. I was once known as the Philadelphia Phantom. Darnell's heart raced. The Philadelphia Phantom was a legendary figure in American chess, a black prodigy who had dominated junior tournaments in the 1980s before mysteriously disappearing. From competitive play, how do I know you're really him? Darnell typed. In your game against Langford, move 17, you sacrificed your queen. Most commentators focused on the sacrifice itself, but the real brilliance was move 15, the quiet bishop retreat that made the sacrifice possible. Darnell stared at the screen. No one had noticed that subtlety in any of the online analyses he'd read. Why are you contacting me? He asked. Because I see myself in you, and because I know what happens to black chess prodigies who threaten the established order. I disappeared because I was forced to, not because I wanted to. Over the next hour, Isaiah explained how his own rise had been similarly sabotaged, opportunities denied, resources withdrawn, reputation smeared through whisper campaigns. They're using the same playbook on you, Isaiah wrote. First, they isolate you from supporters. Then they question your legitimacy. Finally, they offer you a path forward, but only on their terms. What should I do? Darnell asked. That depends on what you want. If you just want to play chess, take Langford's offer. Sacrifice your pride, play their game. But if you want to change the game itself, the cursor blinked for several seconds. That's a harder path, but I can help you walk it. The next morning, Darnell seemed different, more focused, more determined. When Otis mentioned the Berlin tournament, expecting his son's usual disappointment, Darnell surprised him. I think we need to find a way to get there, Dad, he said. On our own terms. That would take money we don't have, son, Otis reminded him gently. I know. Darnell pushed his cereal bowl aside. But I had an idea. What if we started a crowdfunding campaign? After that video went viral, there must be people who'd want to help. Otis considered this. It could work, but Langford might try to block it somehow. Let him try, Darnell replied with unusual fire. I'm not giving up. With Miss Claire's help, they launched a campaign titled, Send Darnell to Berlin, Chess Without Strings. The description carefully avoided naming Langford, while explaining that corporate sponsorship had been offered with unacceptable conditions that would compromise integrity. The response was immediate and overwhelming. Chess clubs from across the country donated. Former champions shared the link. By evening, they had raised nearly half the required amount. The next day, however, a different kind of response arrived. A cease and desist letter from Langford Industries' legal department, claiming the campaign made defamatory insinuations about Grant Langford's intentions. They're trying to shut us down, Otis said, showing the letter to Miss Claire and Darnell. Claire examined it carefully. They're bluffing. There's nothing defamatory here. You never even mentioned him by name. Maybe not, Otis conceded, but fighting this would take lawyers we can't afford. Actually, Claire said thoughtfully, I might know someone who can help. The following afternoon, they met with Thomas Walsh, a former corporate attorney who now ran a community legal aid clinic. This is textbook intimidation, Walsh declared after reviewing the letter. They're hoping you'll back down to avoid a legal battle. He smiled grimly. I spent 20 years writing letters like this for companies like Langford's. Now, I enjoy responding to them. While Walsh drafted a response, Darnell received another message from Isaiah, this one containing a scanned photograph, a young black man holding a trophy, standing beside a much younger Isaac Rubin. "We all connected, son," Isaiah wrote. "The chess world's smaller than they want you to believe." 3 days later, with the legal threat neutralized by Walsh's counter-letter, their fundraising campaign reached its goal. Darnell would go to Berlin, independent of Langford's influence. That evening, as Darnell and Otis celebrated their small victory, they received devastating news. Isaac Rubin had been deported. No warning, no further legal proceedings. He was simply gone. Darnell retreated to his room, overwhelmed by guilt and anger. Had his refusal to cooperate with Langford caused this? Was the price of his independence too high when others paid it? He sat in the dark, his phone lit up with a message from Isaiah. "Don't blame yourself. Rubin knew the risks. He chose his path, just as you must choose yours. Remember what he taught you. The game continues even when pieces are sacrificed." The next morning, Darnell made his decision. He called Amanda Fletcher at the Chess Federation. "Tell them I'll go to Berlin," he said firmly. "But I play for myself. No name tag, no sponsor logo. I play as me." The Berlin International Convention Center hummed with the quiet intensity unique to high-level chess tournaments. 200 young players from 63 countries had gathered to compete, each carrying the expectations of their nations. Darnell stood at the entrance to the main playing hall, taking in the scene. Unlike the other American team members with their matching blazers and equipment bags, he wore a simple black sweater and carried a backpack containing Claire's chess set. "Jackson, over here," called Coach Peterson, a Federation-appointed instructor, who had been assigned to the U.S. team. Peterson had been polite but distant during their limited interactions, clearly uncomfortable with Darnell's unconventional status. As Darnell approached the American section, he heard whispers from other competitors. "That's him, the one who beat the Millionaire. I heard he's got no coach. Probably just got lucky. One-hit wonder." A tall Russian boy snickered to his teammates in accented English. "The charity wildcard has arrived." Darnell kept his expression neutral, remembering Rubin's advice. "Let them underestimate you. Pride makes people blind." The opening ceremony featured speeches from dignitaries and a parade of competitors. When Darnell's name was announced, the applause was mixed with curious murmurs. He was already becoming known as the tournament's anomaly, the unsponsored American who had refused corporate backing. From a shadowy corner of the upper balcony, a figure watched Darnell's entrance with particular interest. The man wore a dark coat with the collar turned up, and he walked with a noticeable limp. Those who glanced his way quickly looked elsewhere, sensing an intensity in his gaze that discouraged casual interaction. "Is that?" an older tournament official whispered to his colleague. "Isaiah Williams," the colleague confirmed. "Hasn't been seen at an international event in decades." "What's he doing here?" "Watching the Jackson boy, apparently." Darnell's first match was against Dmitry Petrov, a 16-year-old Russian prodigy known for his aggressive playing style and psychological tactics. As they sat down at the board, Dmitry smirked. "So you're the famous giant killer," he said, his English precise despite his heavy accent. "Let's see how you do against someone who actually knows how to play." Throughout the game, Dmitry tried to unsettle Darnell, sighing dramatically after Darnell's moves, tapping his fingers impatiently, even whispering comments in Russian that Darnell couldn't understand but recognized as taunts from the tone. Darnell remained focused, remembering Mr. Rubin's teachings about invisible chess. He played solidly, neither too cautious nor too aggressive, letting Dmitry believe he was controlling the game. In the middle game, Dmitry launched a calculated attack, sacrificing a knight for what appeared to be a winning position. The spectators leaned forward, many expecting Darnell to crumble under the pressure. Instead, Darnell revealed the trap he'd been laying for the past 12 moves, a subtle defensive structure that not only neutralized Dmitry's attack, but left the Russian's king dangerously exposed. 4 moves later, Dmitry stared at the board in disbelief, before tipping over his king in resignation. The audience burst into applause as Darnell offered his hand to his stunned opponent. News of Darnell's victory spread quickly through the tournament. By evening, chess commentators on the official live stream were analyzing his game, praising his remarkable composure and tactical foresight unusual in a player so young. Back at the hotel, Darnell called his father to share the good news. "I'm so proud of you, son," Otis said, his voice crackling over the international connection. "How are you holding up?" "I'm okay," Darnell replied. "Just miss having you here." "I know. I wish I could be there too. But Miss Claire is watching the live stream with me. She says your opening was perfect." After hanging up, Darnell went to the hotel restaurant for dinner, where he found himself sitting alone. The other American team members clustered together, at a distant table, occasionally glancing his way but never inviting him to join them. "They are afraid of associating with the outsider," came a voice with a French accent. A girl about Darnell's age stood beside his table, tray in hand. "Mind if I join you?" "Please," Darnell gestured to the empty chair. "I'm Zoe," she introduced herself. "France, Board 3. Darnell. United States, Board." He paused. "Actually, I'm not sure what board I am." Zoe laughed. "You are the board they did not expect." She glanced at the American team table. "They look so serious. Do they not know? Chess is also supposed to be fun." Darnell found himself smiling for the first time since arriving in Berlin. "I think they're worried about their ranking points." "Pfft," Zoe dismissed this with a wave. "Rankings come and go. Good games are forever." She leaned closer, lowering her voice conspiratorially. "Want to know a secret? The kitchen stays open until midnight. If you get hungry later, knock on the back door and ask for Fritz. Tell him Zoe sent you, he'll give you ice cream." Their friendship formed instantly, built on a shared love of chess and an outsider status. Zoe, as she explained, came from a small town and lacked the pedigree of the other French team members from Paris. The next morning, as Darnell prepared for his second match, a tournament official approached him with a concerned expression. "Mr. Jackson, there's been a situation." He handed Darnell a tablet displaying a chess website headline, "Prodigy or Fraud? Sources question American phenom's rapid rise." The article cited an anonymous insider claiming Darnell had used chess AI to prepare for his matches against Langford and at the Berlin tournament. It offered no evidence but raised pointed questions about how a previously unknown player with no formal training could suddenly compete at international level. "This is ridiculous," Darnell said, handing back the tablet. "I've never used AI to prepare." The official looked uncomfortable. "Nevertheless, the tournament committee has received a formal complaint. We're not taking action at this point, but be aware that people are watching closely." Darnell's second match was against Vikram Patel, India's junior champion. Despite the morning's distraction, Darnell played brilliantly, until a critical middle game position where Vikram launched a surprising attack. For the first time in the tournament, Darnell found himself genuinely threatened. With his queen under attack and his king position compromised, he stared at the board, searching for a solution. Suddenly, he remembered a position from his mother's old notebook, a game where a rook sacrifice created just enough counterplay to force a draw. It wasn't a win, but it would save the match. Darnell made the sacrifice, and after 20 tense moves, the game ended in a draw that felt like victory, given how precarious his position had been. As he left the playing hall, Darnell noticed a commotion near the tournament director's office. To his shock, he saw Grant Langford engaged in animated conversation with officials. "What's he doing here?" Darnell whispered to himself. "Trying to bury you," came a voice from behind. Darnell turned to find Isaiah Williams standing there, older and more weathered than in the photos he'd seen, but unmistakable with his intense gaze and dignified bearing. "You're really here," Darnell breathed, unable to hide his awe. "Told you I would be." Isaiah nodded toward Langford. "He's claiming to be here as a sponsor of American chess, but he's actually trying to get you disqualified for missing a team code of conduct meeting that was never properly announced to you." "Can he do that?" "He can try," Isaiah replied grimly. "Come with me. We need to talk strategy both for the board and for what's happening off it." As they walked away, Langford spotted them. His expression darkened as he recognized Isaiah, a flash of genuine alarm crossing his features before he composed himself and turned back to the officials. Later that evening, in a small cafe, several blocks from the tournament venue, Isaiah explained the situation. Langford's trying every angle to discredit you. The AI accusation, the code of conduct violation. He's throwing everything at the wall to see what sticks. Why does he care so much? Darnell asked. It was just one game. Isaiah's laugh held no humor. For men like Langford, losing control of the narrative is worse than losing a game. You were supposed to be a punchline, not a prodigy. By refusing to play your assigned role, you became dangerous. He leaned forward, eyes intense. Listen carefully, Darnell. Tomorrow you'll face Hans Weber, the clockmaker. He's Switzerland's champion, 17 years old, and he plays like a computer. Precise, emotionless, perfect. He's never lost a tournament game in the last 2 years. How do I beat someone like that? Not with calculation. That's his strength. You beat him with creativity, with moves that a computer would never consider. Isaiah pulled out a small notebook. For the next 3 hours, we're going to prepare a surprise for the clockmaker. They worked late into the night in Isaiah's hotel room, analyzing Weber's previous games and developing unorthodox strategies designed to push the Swiss player out of his comfort zone. Chess is a conversation, Isaiah explained. Weber expects a certain kind of dialogue, logical, analytical. We're going to speak a different language altogether. As Darnell finally returned to his own room past midnight, he found Zoe waiting in the hallway with 2 ice cream cones. I thought you might need this, she said, handing him one. I saw Langford earlier. Such an unpleasant man. Thanks. Darnell accepted the ice cream gratefully. How did your match go today? I won, she said with a casual shrug that didn't quite hide her pride. If we both keep winning, we might face each other in the semifinals. I'd like that, Darnell replied with a genuine smile. The next morning, tournament officials announced that Darnell had been cleared of all code of conduct violations, much to Langford's visible frustration. As Darnell prepared for his quarterfinal match against Weber, he noticed Isaiah watching from the upper level, nodding encouragingly. The chess world was about to witness a match no one would soon forget. The Berlin Philharmonic's string quartet played softly as spectators filed into the tournament hall for the semifinal rounds. What had begun as a standard youth chess championship had transformed into an international sensation, largely due to the unexpected rise of Darnell Jackson. News crews from sports networks and chess websites positioned their cameras around the playing area, while a large digital screen displayed the tournament bracket to the packed audience. Tournament officials had moved the semi-final and final matches to the main concert hall to accommodate the growing crowd. The stage, usually home to one of the world's greatest orchestras, now featured a single table with a chess set, dramatically lit by overhead spotlights. Backstage, competitors prepared in separate rooms. Darnell sat alone, Claire's wooden chess, pieces arranged before him in the starting position. His hands moved methodically, adjusting each piece to sit perfectly centered in its square, a calming ritual he'd developed during the tournament. A soft knock at the door interrupted his concentration. 5 minutes, Mr. Jackson, a tournament official announced. Darnell nodded, took a deep breath, and closed his eyes. In his mind, he replayed the advice Isaiah had given him that morning. The clockmaker plays like a machine, Isaiah had said during their dawn preparation session. Perfect memory, flawless calculation, but no soul. Your advantage is your humanity. Play moves that speak to the beauty of the game, not just its logic. The opening ceremony for the semi-final round featured each player's national anthem. When the Star-Spangled Banner played, Darnell stood straight, thinking of his father watching via livestream back home. The American team coach and other players sat in a designated section, but their support seemed perfunctory. Darnell remained the outsider who had refused to follow their program. Hans Weber, the clockmaker, entered the stage with mechanical precision. At 17, the Swiss prodigy had already achieved international master status and was known for his emotionless demeanor and computer-like play. Tall and lanky with close-cropped blonde hair, Weber moved with the calculated efficiency that had earned him his nickname. As they shook hands at the board, Weber's grip was firm, but cold. His eyes revealed nothing. No nervousness, no excitement, just analytical focus. "I have studied all your games," Weber said in precise English. "Your win probability is less than 20%. Darnell smiled slightly. "Good thing chess isn't just about probabilities." The match referee explained the time controls. 5 games total, with the first player to reach 3 points declared the winner. Each game would have 90 minutes per player, with 30 seconds added after each move. Game 1 began with Weber playing white. He opened with the English opening, 1.c4, a flexible positional approach. Darnell responded with a slightly unusual pawn structure that Isaiah had suggested, designed to create imbalanced positions where pure calculation offered less advantage. For the first hour, both players moved at a steady pace, developing their pieces and maneuvering for position. Weber played with robotic consistency, each move following established theory, each position evaluated with computer-like precision. His face remained expressionless, his posture unchanging. Darnell, in contrast, occasionally shifted in his seat, sometimes tilting his head as if listening to the pieces speak to him. When Weber made a particularly strong move, Darnell nodded slightly in appreciation, a gesture that seemed to puzzle the Swiss player. In the commentary room, grandmasters analyzed the game for the audience. "Weber is playing perfect chess," noted the American commentator. "Textbook development, optimal piece placement. It's like watching an engine." "Yes, but Jackson is creating fascinating complications," the German analyst replied. "Look at that pawn structure. It's unorthodox but remarkably resilient. He's inviting Weber into a type of position that can't be solved by calculation alone." By move 30, the position had grown tremendously complex. Weber, facing unfamiliar territory, began to consume more time, his brow furrowing slightly, the first crack in his emotionless facade. On move 37, Darnell sacrificed a knight for 2 pawns and an exposed position for Weber's king. The audience gasped. By traditional evaluation, the sacrifice seemed unsound, but Darnell played it without hesitation. Weber spent 15 minutes analyzing the sacrifice before accepting it. 3 moves later, he realized the trap. Darnell's remaining pieces coordinated in a beautiful attack that left Weber's king desperately seeking shelter. On move 43, Weber tipped over his king, conceding defeat. The audience erupted in applause as Darnell offered his hand across the board. Weber shook it limply, confusion evident in his eyes. "Game 1 to Jackson," the referee announced. 15-minute break before Game 2. Backstage, Darnell found Isaiah waiting. "Beautiful sacrifice," the older master said quietly. "Exactly the kind of move he doesn't understand." "He'll adapt," Darnell warned. "He's already calculating variations for the next game." Isaiah nodded. "Which is why you'll change approaches completely. The second game isn't about winning. It's about making him doubt his methods." Game 2 proved Isaiah right. Weber, now playing black, abandoned his usual approach for a hyper-aggressive gambit, sacrificing a pawn for rapid development. The message was clear: he would not be out-calculated again. Darnell responded with calm, precise defense, giving nothing away. The game evolved into a tense struggle where Weber pressed for an advantage that never quite materialized. After 62 moves of grueling play, they reached an endgame that couldn't be won by either side. "Draw by agreement," the referee announced. The score stood at 1.5 to 0.5 in Darnell's favor. Game 3 began after a longer break for dinner. Weber, playing white again, returned to his methodical style but with subtle adjustments to counter Darnell's creative approach. The game developed into a closed position with complex pawn structures and limited piece mobility, a strategic puzzle that favored Weber's calculating style. For the first time in the match, Darnell found himself genuinely pressured. Weber gradually improved his position, inch by inch, squeezing Darnell's pieces into increasingly passive positions. After 49 moves of precise maneuvering, Weber converted his advantage into a winning endgame. "Checkmate in 7, Darnell said, extending his hand in resignation before Weber could execute the final sequence. Weber's face showed the faintest hint of satisfaction as they reached the midway point with the score tied at 1.5 each. In the Suam corridor outside the playing hall, Darnell encountered Zoe, who had lost her semifinal match against the Chinese champion, Liu Wei. "You're making him work harder than anyone has before," she told Darnell, giving him a quick hug. "His left eye twitches when he's uncertain. Did you notice? It's happened 3 times today." Darnell smiled gratefully. "I didn't catch that. Thanks for the tip." "What will you do in Game 4? She asked. "Something unexpected," he replied. Before Game 4, Darnell sat in the preparation room with Isaiah, discussing strategy in hushed tones. "He's found his rhythm again," Isaiah warned. "You need to break it once more." "I've been thinking about Mr. Rubin's endgame lessons," Darnell said. "The ones about creating imbalances even in simplified positions." Isaiah's eyes lit up. "The Russian school. Yes, that might work." Game 4 began with Darnell playing white. Instead of opening with E4 or D4 as expected, he played NF3, the Réti opening, signaling a flexible, hypermodern approach. Weber responded cautiously, clearly unprepared for this stylistic shift. What followed was a masterclass in strategic complexity. Darnell sacrificed a pawn early, then another, creating dynamic imbalances across the board. Each time Weber calculated and captured material, Darnell's remaining pieces gained activity and dangerous attacking lanes. After 3 hours of intense play, they reached an endgame where Darnell had a rook against Weber's bishop and 2 pawns, a theoretically drawn position in most cases. But Darnell played with remarkable precision, setting subtle traps that required perfect defense. Weber, exhausted from the constant vigilance required, eventually misplaced his bishop. Darnell immediately capitalized, creating a passed pawn that could only be stopped at the cost of Weber's remaining material. "I resign," Weber said, his voice showing emotion for the first time, frustration mixed with grudging respect. The score now stood at 2.5 to 1.5 in Darnell's favor. One more win or 2 draws would send him to the final. The 5th and potentially final game would be decided in blitz format, 5 minutes on each player's clock, with a 3-second increment after each move. No time for deep calculation. No room for second-guessing. Pure chess instinct would determine the outcome. As they sat down for the decisive game, the audience fell completely silent. Weber's left eye twitched noticeably as he set up his pieces. Darnell, playing black, appeared calm, but inside his heart raced. "This is where your gift truly shines," Isaiah had told him. "In blitz, the music of the pieces speaks louder than any calculation." The game began at lightning pace. Weber played the aggressive King's Gambit, a romantic attacking opening rarely seen in modern top-level chess. Darnell accepted the Gambit pawn, entering a sharp tactical battle. Pieces flew across the board as both players made their moves, within seconds. Weber played with the desperation of someone trying to impose order on chaos, while Darnell responded with intuitive moves that seemed to anticipate his opponent's intentions. By move 15, a wild position had emerged with both kings under attack and pieces hanging across the board. Weber had a material advantage, but Darnell's pieces were more active, creating constant threats. As they approached move 30, both players had less than a minute on their clocks. The audience watched in breathless tension as Weber reached for his bishop, then hesitated, his hand hovering as he recalculated. In that moment of uncertainty, Darnell saw his opportunity. When Weber finally moved his bishop to capture a pawn, Darnell immediately responded with a knight move that appeared to be a blunder. His hand released the piece and hit the clock in one fluid motion. Weber's eyes widened. He quickly captured Darnell's apparently misplaced knight, a triumphant expression flashing across his face. Then Darnell executed the combination he'd prepared 3 moves earlier, a queen sacrifice followed by a rook check, forcing Weber's king into a mating net created by Darnell's remaining bishop and knight. Weber stared at the board in disbelief as the inevitable checkmate materialized before him. With 7 seconds left on his clock, he tipped over his king. The hall erupted. Spectators leapt to their feet, applauding the extraordinary display of chess artistry they had just witnessed. Even the American team stood and cheered. National, pride temporarily overwhelming their previous distance. In the front row, Grant Langford sat stone-faced, his jaw clenched tight. Beside him, an aide whispered urgently in his ear while typing rapidly on a phone. Darnell shook Weber's hand across the board, genuine respect passing between the competitors. As Darnell turned to acknowledge the audience's applause, he caught sight of Isaiah in the wings, the older master's face beaming with pride. "The final match will begin tomorrow at 10 a.m., the tournament director announced over the applause. Darnell Jackson of the United States will face Liu Wei of China for the World Junior Championship. Backstage, as reporters clamored for interviews, Isaiah pulled Darnell aside. "Langford is making his final move," he warned. "His people are circulating a story claiming your win would be invalidated due to unauthorized coaching from me. They're saying I provided electronic assistance during breaks. That's ridiculous," Darnell protested. "We never used computers. Truth doesn't matter to men like him. Only winning does." Isaiah squeezed Darnell's shoulder. "Get some rest. Tomorrow will be the hardest fight yet, both on and off the board." Back in America, Preston Langford sat in his darkened bedroom, staring at his computer screen as he put the finishing touches on a social media post. The carefully crafted message claimed, "Inside sources," had confirmed that Darnell Jackson's tournament success would be nullified due to cheating allegations. "They'll announce it tomorrow after the final," he typed, fabricating details about electronic devices and unauthorized coaching. He added hashtags designed to make the story spread rapidly, his finger hovering over the post button. For a moment he hesitated, a flicker of conscience breaking through his resentment. Then he thought of his father's humiliation, of his own declining social status as the kid whose dad lost to the janitor's son, and clicked post. Within an hour, the story had been shared thousands of times. Chess forums buzzed with the rumor, sports websites began publishing speculative articles, and the narrative spread like wildfire. Darnell Jackson's fairy tale was about to end in a disgrace. In Berlin, unaware of the brewing storm, Darnell slept soundly for the first time since arriving in Germany. In his dreams, chess pieces moved in beautiful patterns, guided by his mother's voice whispering strategies he'd never learned but somehow always knew. Morning brought a text message from his father. "Proud of you, son. No matter what happens, today, you've already won." The final match against Liu Wei drew an even larger crowd than the semi-final. The Chinese champion was a 15-year-old prodigy who had dominated Asian chess for 3 years. Unlike Weber's mechanical style, Liu played with flair and tactical brilliance. As Darnell took his seat opposite Liu, tournament officials approached the table with concerned expressions. The head referee leaned down to whisper to Darnell, "There are allegations circulating online about unauthorized assistance." He glanced toward Isaiah, who stood watching from the audience. "We're investigating, but the match will proceed as scheduled. Just be aware." Darnell nodded, his concentration momentarily broken. He looked out at the audience and spotted Grant Langford, now sitting in the front row with a satisfied smile playing at the corners of his mouth. The final match format required a best-of-7 series. Hours of intense chess lay ahead. Game 1 began with Liu playing a brilliant sacrificial attack that caught Darnell off guard. The Chinese player demonstrated why he was considered the tournament favorite, combining tactical precision with creative vision. Darnell fought valiantly but eventually succumbed to the relentless pressure. Between games, Isaiah found Darnell in the preparation room. "Don't let the rumors distract you," he advised. "That's exactly what Langford wants." "It's not fair," Darnell said, frustration evident in his voice. "Why can't he just let it go?" "Because men like him don't know how to lose. But you," Isaiah tapped Darnell's chest, "you know how to fight, so fight." Game 2 saw a transformed Darnell. Playing with the white pieces, he launched a positional masterpiece that gradually strangled Liu's counterplay. Move by move, he improved his position until Liu found himself in a hopeless endgame with no counterplay. As they prepared for Game 3, tournament officials interrupted with an announcement. Due to concerns raised about potential rule violations, Both players will be required to undergo additional security screening before each remaining game. The implication was clear. The online rumors had reached tournament organizers. Darnell submitted to the screening with quiet dignity, emptying his pockets and allowing officials to check his clothing for electronic devices. Games 3 and 4 resulted in hard-fought draws, bringing the match to a 2-2 tie. By Game 5, both players were showing signs of fatigue after days of intense competition. During a critical moment in the fifth game, while Liu was deep in thought, Darnell noticed movement in the audience. Tournament security personnel were speaking with Isaiah, gesturing for him to follow them. The older master stood with dignity and quietly exited the hall. Darnell's concentration wavered, his mind racing with concerns about what was happening. In that moment of distraction, he missed a subtle defensive resource in the position. Liu pounced on the opportunity, launching a decisive attack that Darnell couldn't repel. Down 3-2 in the match, with Isaiah mysteriously removed from the audience, Darnell faced the most challenging moment of his young chess career. Game 6 would either end his run or force a decisive seventh game. In the preparation room, alone. For the first time in days, Darnell closed his eyes and thought of everyone who had supported his journey. His father's unwavering faith, his mother's early encouragement, Miss Claire's quiet assistance, Mr. Rubin's specialized training, Zoe's friendship, and Isaiah's guidance. "I play for all of you," he whispered to himself. Game 6 began with Darnell playing white. Instead of his usual opening, he played 1.e4, the move his mother had taught him when he was just 5 years old. Simple, direct, classical chess. What followed was not just a game, but a statement. Darnell played with breathtaking clarity, combining the calculation he'd learned from Rubin, the psychology Isaiah had taught him, and the creativity that was uniquely his own. Liu fought brilliantly, finding resource after resource to extend the game, but Darnell's vision proved deeper. After 68 moves of extraordinary chess, Liu extended his hand in resignation. The series was tied 3-3. One final game would determine the world junior champion. Before the decisive game, tournament, officials made a public announcement. After thorough investigation, no evidence of rule violations has been found. All previous results stand, and the final game will proceed as scheduled. Isaiah reappeared in the audience, giving Darnell a subtle nod. Nearby, Langford's face darkened with frustration. The final game began with Liu playing white. Both competitors, exhausted from the grueling tournament, summoned their remaining energy for one last battle. The game developed into a complex middle game with chances for both sides. Liu played aggressively, seeking a knockout blow, while Darnell defended with precision, waiting for counterattacking opportunities. On move 32, Liu launched what appeared to be a winning combination, sacrificing a rook for a devastating attack on Darnell's king. The audience gasped as the Chinese player's pieces swarmed toward the American's monarch. For nearly 5 minutes, Darnell sat motionless, calculating variations, seeing lines that extended 15 moves deep. Then, just as commentators began suggesting resignation was his only option, a small smile appeared on his face. He made a move that no one, not the audience, not the commentators, not even Isaiah, had anticipated. A quiet queen retreat that appeared to be a blunder, opening lines toward his own king. Liu hesitated, sensing a trap but unable to see it. After careful thought, he captured a seemingly free pawn, committing to his attack. What followed was chess artistry at its finest. Darnell's pieces suddenly coordinated in ways that hadn't seemed possible a few moves earlier. His apparently retreating queen re-emerged on the queenside, creating threats that Liu couldn't address while maintaining his kingside attack. 3 moves later, Liu found himself in an impossible position. His king under attack, his queen about to be captured, and no way to address both threats simultaneously. The Chinese champion stared at the board for a full minute, before extending his hand in resignation. "Checkmate in 5, Liu acknowledged with a respectful nod. "Beautiful play." The audience erupted in a standing ovation that lasted nearly 5 minutes. Darnell Jackson, the janitor's son who had begun his journey on a cardboard chessboard, was now the world junior chess champion. In the aftermath of his victory, chaos and celebration swirled around Darnell. Reporters shouted questions, photographers jostled for position, and chess officials prepared for the closing ceremony. Through the crowd, Darnell spotted Grant Langford making a hasty exit, his plans to discredit the young champion thoroughly defeated. The tournament director presented Darnell with the championship trophy, a crystal king piece mounted on a marble base. As cameras flashed, Darnell spoke into the microphone. "Chess taught me that every piece has value," he said, his voice steady despite his exhaustion. "Even a pawn can change the game if it moves forward with purpose. I want to thank everyone who believed in me, especially my father who taught me dignity, my mother who taught me to dream, and my mentors who taught me to see beyond the visible board." 3 weeks later, Darnell's return to his hometown resembled a hero's welcome. The mayor declared Darnell Jackson Day, and Preston Academy, the school that had tried to discredit him, organized a parade in his honor. Otis watched from the sidelines, declining to participate. "Let the boy have his day," he said when asked why he wasn't marching alongside his son. "I'm proud just watching." In the days that followed, the fallout from Berlin continued to reshape lives. Investigative journalists published emails between Grant Langford and Preston Academy board members, revealing a coordinated campaign to undermine Darnell and anyone who supported him. The scandal forced the resignation of several board members and damaged Langford's reputation in business circles. Preston. Langford faced consequences of his own. His fabricated social media post was traced back to him, resulting in his expulsion from Preston Academy for ethics violations. His final appearance at school was a quiet exit from the headmaster's office, eyes downcast as former friends pretended not to notice him. "Why did they love him?" Preston asked during his first therapy session the following week, tears streaming down his face. "He was nothing. He came from nothing." "Perhaps," his therapist replied gently. "That's precisely why." Meanwhile, Miss Clare was not only reinstated as librarian, but promoted to academic dean with a mandate to develop programs for gifted students from underrepresented backgrounds. Her first official act was to establish the Loretta Jackson Scholarship for excellence in mathematics and logic. Most surprising was the news about Mr. Rubin. Following international coverage of the tournament and Darnell's public acknowledgement of his mentor's influence, immigration lawyers had taken up his case. Pro bono, the deportation order was challenged, reviewed, and ultimately reversed. By summer's end, Rubin had returned, granted permanent residency status after decades of uncertainty. When he visited Darnell for the first time since his return, the old Russian's eyes glistened with unshed tears. "We have only played the opening," he said, embracing his young student. "The middle game now begins." A month after Berlin, a postcard arrived from Paris. The message, in Zoe's distinctive handwriting, was simple. "Rematch in Vienna next year? P.S. Fritz says the ice cream will be waiting." Opportunities continued to appear. Harvard University sent a letter expressing interest in Darnell's future application, despite his being only 12. "Perhaps call us in 6 years," Darnell replied politely. With the prize money and donations that had poured in after his victory, Darnell and Otis established the Urban Chess Initiative, a free program for underserved youth. They named it after Loretta, honoring the woman whose belief in her son's potential had started everything. On a warm September evening, Otis and Darnell sat on the roof of their apartment building, watching the sunset. They had moved to a slightly larger place but had chosen to remain in the same neighborhood, close to the community that had supported them. "You finally beat the world, son," Otis said, his voice filled with quiet pride. Darnell shook his head, smiling. "Nah, Dad, I just made it open." 6 blocks away, in a community center that had once been a vacant storefront, a 9-year-old boy with worn sneakers and bright eyes walked tentatively into the Urban Chess Initiative's newly opened headquarters. He clutched a chess piece he'd carved himself from wood scraps, a makeshift knight with uneven features but unmistakable spirit. Darnell looked up from the demonstration board where he'd been setting up pieces for the evening's first class. Seeing the boy's hesitation, He smiled and gestured to an empty chair. "You play?" Darnell asked. The boy nodded, hope and uncertainty battling in his expression, the same expression Darnell had worn not so long ago. "Then let's begin," Darnell said, making the first move in a game that would extend far beyond the 64 squares before them. What would our world look like if we recognized brilliance wherever it appears, not just where we expect to find it? If this story moved you, please like, subscribe, and share to help us continue bringing these powerful narratives to life.